Unique lat pull down I posted. I asked if y'all wanted it. Unanimous decision that you did, so let's jump into it. A couple different things to cover for this lat pull down to make sense. The first thing I need to address is the rib cage and how that's playing with the shoulder and the lat actions, essentially. Then you have your rib cage. Then on the back of your rib cage, you have a scapula, humerus here. This is essentially what you're looking at for the underlying bony structure of the lat. Oh, and then we have our spine. Spine's going to attach to your pelvis. So this is more or less the underlying structure that you have. Your bones are going to be the thing that moves. I've only drawn the upper arm because your lat does not attach to your forearm at all, so you can just ignore that. Now, you're gonna have this attachment site here on the outside of humerus. It's going to come in front of the humerus and then go wrapping around to the back, where it's going to attach to your scapula, and it's going to attach all down your spine. And then there's this big piece, this big sheath of connective tissue. So then your lat is attaching to that connective tissue, coming up, coming in front of the humerus and attaching on the outside edge. And then it's gonna run back through here, across, and then all down the spine. So this is where your lat is running. Now keep in mind that this muscle is attached to this connective tissue, which is connected to your hip. Okay, that's important. That's all connected there. You can see its origin is all along the spine. Its insertion is on the humerus. What happens when a muscle shortens, they just slide over each other. So this point gets pulled closer to those points. This band is coming from behind me, wrapping around the front and attaching here. As I reach up, elbow crease forward, reaching up, 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 up. That is putting this on more and more of a stretch because you're pulling this spot farther away from there. And then when you reverse that, down, 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 down. Now, as you continue to try and shorten that, you're going to go internally rotated and laterally flexed. Hop up and try this right now so you can feel what I'm talking about. If you take this elbow pit and you try and point it behind you, and then you lean to the side and you try and touch this elbow pit to your butt cheek, you should get, a cramping contraction through that lat. On the flip side, getting it as long as possible would be the opposite. So now we're going lateral flexion, scapular elevation, reaching, and you should be able to feel that stretch through your lat. If you let this roll out, you're not gonna have as much of a stretch because of where this inserts and because it's externally rotating there. This wraps around the back, and so what that's doing from a side profile, if you have your rib cage and you have your scapula here and you have your arm, you can picture that the lat is coming from down here and it's wrapping up and then attaching in front. So it's got this swoop to it. So it's coming around the rib cage. If you've taken mechanic course, you'll know that pulleys, every time you go over a pulley and back down, it cuts the load in half essentially. So as you get more wrapped around your rib cage, it's going to act as a pulley and it's going to decrease the load, aka make you stronger. So this position is a lot stronger than this position because you're losing the mechanical advantage of being wrapped around that pulley. Ideally, if you have a movement, it should start heavier relatively and get lighter through the range of motion as you lose that mechanical advantage. So rowing movements and pull down movements probably have the biggest drop off of all movements from strong to weak. You see that catch? That was fire. Now, if we look at the machine I've chosen, the axis is right here. The axis is what it pivots on. And then the load sticks out and is loaded up out here. And then you have your handle here that you pull down this way. And then that pulls this load up that way. When gravity is the force that's pulling on it, the force is always straight up and down because gravity is where the resistance is coming from. Now gravity is acting on the weight that you load on here. The pivot point is there. The load is there. Gravity is pulling down on this. So this is the line of resistance for that. But the axis is up here. And so you have the axis here, and then the distance between the axis and the load, when that is longest, is when it is going to be the heaviest, because it's going to be this weight multiplied by the distance. You have your pivot point here. When you start on the machine, it's like this, and then it goes to this midpoint, and then maybe gets a little bit above it. That would be if you start in the seat, because you're already loaded there, you can't go up anymore. So as you get farther into the movement, this distance gets longer. As you're getting weaker, this gets harder, making it so that way the movement is really hard to get a full rep on it. Versus if we move our butt onto the floor, now the arm is going to start relatively higher, so it'll maybe start here instead, and then as you get up in the movement, it's going to follow this arc. So it starts longest, and then as you get farther into the movement, it gets shorter. So the weight is getting relatively lighter, so you can get more of a complete contraction through that end range than if you were to sit in the seat and use it normally. We're doing one arm at a time, because as I described with the function of the lat, part of what your lat assists with is lateral flexion, because it's attached to all this stuff up here and down here. When you bring those closer together, you get lateral flexion. So if you want to get more range of motion through the muscle, you want more lateral flexion and ability to open up on the side and reach up. We're able to pull down, lean to the side, get the muscle as short as possible, get a really cramping contraction, and then you go back up and lean out and put it on the biggest stretch possible. This isn't a universal principle. Not everyone's going to agree with this. As a matter of fact, tons of people are arguing about this on media, social media in general. But my personal approach to training is to use as large a range of motion as possible on every movement. That means getting deep into a stretch, getting deep into a contraction. I just think it's a more complete way to train. If you do stuff like this where you're aligning the resistance so you can get a very good smooth contraction across the whole range, I think it's reasonable to say you can get more training effect from less sets. Because if I was to do an exercise that is really hard in this position and really easy in this position, now I'm really only getting the training effect here, and all this motion is relatively wasted. Versus if I can get it to align well and it's really hard the whole way through, and then I go to pull and it doesn't move at all, then this full range has been exhausted. And that's what I'm trying to get accomplished with this row in particular. Past the lat activation, the lat stretch, the lateral flexion, there is some stuff going on at the hip as well, because the way that I'm sitting does have an impact on the movement itself. I think this is important. Isn't necessarily because there's something really magical or fancy about having your legs splayed like that, or that you need to necessarily do anything for hip internal external rotation. But I do believe the more frequently, more consistently you expose your joints to these different positions, the more comfortable they're going to be in them, the more you're going to have access to them. So you're going to live a life with more range of motion, more free movement, and have a lower chance of injury because you're consistently exposing to these positions. So that way when you off chance are playing catch with your kids outside and you quick jab step and you go into hip internal external rotation, it's not a position that you haven't been exposed to. So that's more or less where this is coming from. At your hips, you know, you have your pelvis. You got a picture of this as a big bowl, and then on the sides you have your hip sockets, and then in your hip sockets you have your femoral head. In this joint, essentially you're going to be pushing. One leg is going into external rotation. When your foot goes in, your hip is going external rotation. This part is coming up and going out to the side. So this head is rotating heavily in this direction. And then on the other side, it's going out to the side and internally rotating. This is going internally rotated here. Sorry, this is not the most clean illustration. But you can see you're forcing that hip into internal rotation and this hip into external rotation as you're doing that lat pull down. And that is just going to open up more range of motion at your hips passively, because it's like you're doing mobility work while you are actively participating in something else. This is just a way to sneak in mobility work and make your workout more efficient, get more bang for your buck. Because why would I want to take the time to do independent hip internal, external mobility if I could just do my lat pull down and also get that stimulus at the same time? Doing things like this, sneaking in little bites of mobility, is just an additional layer to add into your training. It isn't necessary, but I think doing something like this is a really awesome choice, especially if you want to get more out of the time that you're in the gym. But getting on the ground to get the most out of this training stimulus for your lats, for your back, is the important part, is getting down on the ground. If you can anchor yourself in more, that's better. So I'm using the thigh pad to scoop my arm under, really hold everything in place, because the more stability you have, the more contractility you have. I don't know if contractility is a word, but you get better output because your body is more stable. Therefore, your brain signals it is safe to output more because we are stable here. Include lateral flexion in both ways. Boom, open up, close down. Think about driving your elbow across your body on the way up to really get a deep stretch. Think about pulling that down and getting really crunched in, creating that contraction at the bottom. Try it out. Let me know what you think. And let me know if you think I should do more breakdown videos like this, and if I did a terrible job with the illustrations and it was confusing. Let me know.